My name is William Roca. I am the Director of Programs at Village Preservation. We're so excited for you to join us this evening for this special presentation. I first want to give a big thank you to Richard Berman, who connected us with Billy Altman's publishers. Now, before I introduce our esteemed guests for this evening, can I get a show of hands who is a member of Village Preservation? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, all of you. The rest of you. I am a fan of self-gifting and for the holidays, so you can get yourself a gift, and if you want to learn more about membership, we have these handy-dandy little brochures available on your seats and as you exit the building as well. But if you're unfamiliar with Village Preservation, let me tell you a little bit more about us. We were founded back in 1980, and we work to preserve and protect the architectural, cultural, and historical character of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We helped get landmark designation for over 1,300 buildings, and we do about 80 programs like this throughout the year, the majority of which are absolutely free. Now, the benefits of membership are you're going to get first dibs for a program. You can see we are booked out on this program, and we had a massive wait list, so there are a lot of disappointed people who could not come to this program this evening. And we also do members-only programming as well. Now to tell you a little bit more about some of the other awesome programming we're doing. We have our final program of 2025 happening tomorrow evening, which you can enjoy from the comfort of your own home. Because December is also South Village Month, so we're looking at the history of refugees in our neighborhoods right after the Second World War. This is a fabulous webinar presentation, absolutely free to join and watch at your leisure from home. Now, if you just want to learn a little bit more about Village Preservation, head over to villagepreservation.org. Take a look and learn about the advocacy work that we do, all the other awesome programs that we've done throughout the year, and our January programs will be announced very, very shortly. But I also highly recommend, if you're still thinking about becoming a member, please check out our resources. These are all free to use whether you decide to become a member or not. We have an incredible image archive. These are pictures donated by Village Preservation supporters over the years, covering all decades of the village's history, all free to explore and take advantage of as well. We also have an oral history collection, hear the voices of people who have lived and done the amazing things here in our neighborhoods. And I also highly, highly recommend that you please check out our digital maps as well. Put yourself together a walking tour that you can enjoy from the comfort of your own home or pound the pavement right here in the neighborhoods. Learn about all of the incredible people and places in our neighborhoods. And speaking of incredible people and places, it's my great honor to introduce this evening's guests. All right. So, also a note. Can we put them on silent? Please. Now, books will be for sale after the talk is finished. I wanted to note that. So if you want to purchase a book and have Billy sign the book before you leave this evening, just give us a couple of minutes after the program is finished to do the quick setup. But you will be able to purchase books by credit card this evening. Now, a quick run of show. Billy is going to do some readings from the book. Then he's going to be in conversation with Andrew Berman here. They're going to be doing a little talk, have a conversation, and then we're going to have a Q&A. But now to introduce this evening's speakers. So first we have Andrew Berman. He's our Executive Director at Village Preservation. Has been so since 2022. And he's secured landmark designation, as I said, for 1,300 buildings. He's a lifelong New Yorker, previously worked in government and politics, and is an architectural historian by training. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Billy Altman. He is a Grammy-nominated singer, Grammy-nominated journalist, critic, and historian whose work covering the worlds of music, pop culture, and sports has appeared over the years in such esteemed publications as the New York Times, the New Yorker, Rolling Stone, Spin, Esquire, GQ, People, Entertainment Weekly, and the Village Voice. He's a former senior editor of Creme magazine, and he was a founding curator of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and a consultant for the Grammy Museum in LA. And most recently, he served as chief scriptwriter for both the National Blues Museum in St. Louis and the National Museum of African American Music in Nashville. He's the recipient of the ASCPA News Tales Award, and he's a long-standing faculty member of the Humanities Department in New York City School of Visual Arts, where he teaches courses in rock, jazz, folk music, as well as nonfiction writing. He lives in the lower Hudson Valley, so thank you for joining us here in the city this evening.
Thank everybody so much for coming. We were hoping that Allan, who was going over the bottom, might be able to join us, but he had some other commitments, he was unable to come, but I will be happy to represent for him. The Bottom Line book was done as an oral history, and I interviewed over 100 people. We interviewed performers, we interviewed people who work at the club, we interviewed managers, we managed agents, and patrons of the club as well. And so we have a breadth of voices that come through a lot. And my job, of course, was to interview everybody and try and put this all together in a fashion that would be hopefully entertaining for people to read. Just want to read a few things from the book, a couple of introductions. I will not attempt to speak as Bruce Springsteen, but we had a lot of great voices who were able to take part. So I just want to read you from the introductions to the book. We have a wonderful introductory statement by a woman named Melanie Mintz, who was involved in several big productions at the Bottom Line, and she said, passing through the doors of the Bottom Line could change her life. From the Cotton Club to Studio 54, New York nightclubs have always been at the mercy of the whims of public taste in terms of both music and atmosphere. And yet the Bottom Line, cabaret theater located at the corner of West Fourth and Mercer Street, just east of Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village, was a notable exception to the city's scene-obsessed club culture. From its opening in February 1974 until January 2004, when a dispute with landlord New York University over an expiring lease led to the club's closing just weeks shy of its 30th anniversary, the Bottom Line was an oasis of purity for the serious music fan. That's because the 5,000 square foot club, its 400-seat rectangular performance room, well known to regulars for its long, narrow tables, hardback chairs, and barely traversable aisles, was geared towards listening, a priority symbolized by its impeccable sound system. And throughout its memorable history, the club's owners, Allan, Berman, and Stanley, steadfastly maintained a clear vision of what a club, a real music club, could be. Childhood friends and fellow Brooklynites who'd gone into business together in the late 1960s as a singularly complementary team, talent Booker Pepper, an unabashed music enthusiast, and lawyer Snadowsky, an attention to detail, hard bargaining dealmaker. The two founded the club after several years of promoting acts at popular downtown night spots like the Village Gate and Folk City. When the club first opened, it was an era of free-form FM radio in New York where, in just a matter of minutes, a listener could go from hearing folk to jazz to rock, and they wanted to do live what those disc jockeys were doing on the air. That philosophy produced a club that could seamlessly veer from presenting glam punks to New York Dolls to glam country queen Dolly Parton, from bluegrass pioneer Bill Monroe to jazz master Bill Evans, from reserve guitar hero Richard Thompson to wild man rock and roller Little Richard. In so doing, the club's identity was its intimate diversity and its adventurous spirit of openness, an openness that was complemented by the special relationship that Pepper and Snadowsky developed with artists, managers, agents, radio and record company executives, their own employees, and at the Bottom Line, the well over 3 million patrons who, over the course of its 3 decades, filled its seats night after night. And it really is kind of what the club is about, I think, in many respects. A respect for artists and a respect for customers. I think it was made the club such a unique fashion. I just wanted to read a few things here about things that went on at the club. The club had originally been, the space of West Fourth and Mercer had been what they call a beer and banjo joint. called the Red Garter, okay, where they played a lot of 20s music and people with straw hats would play, and the stage was a converted fire truck, I mean, it was like insane. And they completely gutted the whole place. And with the help of some very creative people, most notably Bruce DeForest, who was who had helped build the stage at Woodstock, and John Chester, who had done the soundboard at the Fillmore East, made a club that was built for people to come in and sit down and pay attention to what was going on stage. One of my favorite things about that is the fact that the club had 3 tiers, if you ever went to the bottom line. So if you sat all the way up front, or you sat all the way in the back, you could see the stage clearly. And that really meant a lot to everybody. And as a member of the working press, as a functioning rock critic, I sat all the way in the back tables, where all the critics sat, and you could look straight through and see the stage. As it was being built, I wanted to read a really cool story when the club was being built, to give you an insight into Stanley Snadowsky, who was the man behind the scenes and dealt with all of the contracts and negotiations for the club. Allan was more the talent scout and talent searcher. Anyway, this is a thing that happened at the club while they were building the club. During the 9+ months that the bottom one was being built, Pepper and Snadowsky, neither of whom ever learned how to drive, decided to hire a driver to get them from Brooklyn, where they lived, to the club and back, and to run errands as well. His name was Richie Schulberg, an out-of-the-box singer and fiddler known professionally as Citizen Kafka, leader of the aptly named bluegrass band, the Wretched Refuge String Band. One day during construction, Snadowsky sent Schulberg to a nearby Nathan's restaurant to get him lunch, which for Stanley usually meant enough hot dogs, burgers, roast beef sandwiches, and French fries to feed a small army. And then also stop at the Orange Julius stand on 8th Street and 6th Avenue to pick up plenty of their signature drinks and wash it all down. Stanley, if you ever went to the club, was a large man. Okay? All right? After more than an hour, Schulberg still hadn't returned, and then the phone rang, and it was Richie. "Where are you?" asked an annoyed Snadowsky. "I'm starving." "I'm sorry that I'm not back yet," said Schulman. "I'm at the police station." What had happened was that just as he was leaving Orange Julius, a robbery was on progress at the jewelry shop next door. Running out of the store, the robber ran past Schulberg and, brandishing a gun, commandeered a taxi. Terrified, the cabbie accidentally put the car in reverse and slammed it into a store window across the street just as a swarm of police cars arrived. Guns drawn, the cops pulled the suspect out of the backseat of the taxi, and when one of them asked if anyone had seen what happened, Schulberg instinctively waved his hand to signal yes. "So I'm at the station now," he told Snadowsky. "I'm waiting to give my statement. They said I could make one call." "Okay," said Stanley. "I understand, but you still have my lunch." "Yes," said Schulberg, "it's right next to me." To which Snadowsky replied, "Good. Is there a sergeant nearby? Can you put him on the phone?" After Schulberg handed the phone to the cops, Snadowsky shifted into his businessman's mode. "Hello, my name is Stanley Snadowsky. I am the co-owner of a new nightclub that is currently in construction at 15 West 4th Street. Over an hour ago, I sent one of my employees, Mr. Schulberg, to pick up lunch for my construction crew. Since the food is an hour late, they have stopped working, and they're now just milling around, and nothing is getting done. And that's costing me a lot of money. Obviously, Mr. Schulberg needs to stay there as long as you need him, but I was wondering if you could help me out and bring the food here so that my crew can eat and get back to work." A few minutes later, a police car pulled up at the club, and remarkably, 2 of New York's finest from Manhattan's 6th Precinct got out and delivered Stanley his lunch, proving yet again that when it came to getting things he wanted, Counselor Stanley Snadowsky could be very persuasive. We have a lot of stuff from a lot of people who have played at the club. I wanted to share one very nice story here, and again, how to just kind of understand the effect that the club had on people, both people who went to the club and obviously people who performed at the club. We have an entire chapter devoted to Bruce Springsteen's 5 Night Stand when the Born to Run album came out, a very significant part of Bruce Springsteen's career, which he was happy to talk to you about. But I'm going to read you something from Max Weinberg, his drummer. Okay? Well, I'm sure you all know from all of his work on coming up, Brian Show and his night show and all of that stuff. Anyway, this is Max talking about one of the shows at the bottom line. The Friday night show we played there, which was the third night, the second show was broadcast live. And during Rosalita, there was a section where we would vamp on this particular riff, as we call it, and Bruce would do these very impromptu cues and to stop. I'd only been in the band about a year and something distracted me, and I missed the cue to stop. And it really shook me up. I mean, it was sort of, were there mistakes in music? Not really, but this was, in my view, a terrible mistake. But Bruce being Bruce, he worked it into the act, pretended to grab my drumsticks. How old was I? I was 24. And the wild thing is, I mean, it was a very memorable night for me. I actually went to Bruce afterwards and said, I'm sorry I missed the cue. I was distracted or something. And all Bruce said was, you gotta watch out for the curves, Max. He was only 25, I was 24, and it was such a wise statement because it applies to life, not just playing the bottom line. And on stage, I've never taken my eyes off of it ever since. It's like that connection between pitchers and catchers. And when I grew into that role, I mean the drummer's role, whether it's me or anybody else, in any band, the drummer really has to lead the band. And the drummers that I admired were drummers that took command in that way. I had to learn how to do that. A lot of potential, and I'm still playing, so I think I achieved my potential. But the odd thing is, about 10 years ago, someone took a picture and sent it to my management of the moment when that mistake happened in Rosalita. I have it in my office, and it reminds me. It's incredible because my face looks like Emmett Kelly at Glenn. And Bruce is obviously facing me. I can't see his face, but I do remember his face being irritated, to say the least. And Steve Vincent is kind of suppressing a laugh in the picture. I have it in my office, but I see it every day. It's a reminder to watch out for the curves. You just never know. I've been watching out for the curves ever since. The hardest thing in a rock band is to get three things: a great singer, a great frontman, and great songs. So we check off all those boxes. That's by far the hardest thing. I auditioned against 60 drummers, and Bruce saw something in me, and after 50 years, here we are. We're still doing it. This is very much indicative of the artists that I talked to who had moments with the club that resonated them so much throughout their entire careers. I'll read for the sake of time, I'll read one more story, if that's okay. And it's a story that occurs fairly late in the club's history, in 1999, towards the latter part of the club being open, and it's from... This is a story that came to us from Ed Griffin, the great disc jockey who spent so many years here in New York, and is a great friend of Allan Pepper's and Stanley and the club. I remember one night at the bottom line. At this point, I'm working at WFUV, so it's the late 90s, and June Carter Cash had made a new record, and June was going to be showcased at the bottom line as an important artist, as what the new record would be. We were so excited to have her up at FUV that afternoon. There was a song in that album, I think, because her granddaughter was dating Quentin Tarantino at the time. June wrote a song called Quentin Tarantino Makes the Strangest Movies I Have Ever Seen. She was just such a card. But anyway, I got to the club early and I'm sitting there, and remember at the bottom line, you have to walk to the front door like anybody else and around the tables to get backstage. You couldn't really have total privacy entering, and everybody was going to see you. I see June and her people coming in, and among the people who are with her is Johnny. And I'm like, oh my God, Johnny Cash is here. So when he walked in, you could see it. It was like, God love him, he's really weak. So June comes out, she's doing her show, and then all of a sudden, she invites Johnny up on stage. And in that period, when he walked on and they put the mic in his hand and he performed with her, his whole body took on great strength. You watched this amazing transition because he was doing what he loved with the woman that he loved, and he became really strong. And then as soon as the song was finished, he kind of shrunk down again and had to be kind of helped out as he walked up the stage. But it was this time in there, specifically with Johnny and June, and I was like, did I just witness a miracle? And of course, it was the bottom line, because stuff like that just always happened there. A couple of a lot of stories in this book.
Well, Billy, thank you so much for that wonderful little taste of the book. And, you know, in approaching this, I had to make peace with the fact that in the course of, you know, a 45-minute conversation with me and, you know, questions from the public, we're only at most going to be able to skim the surface of this incredible document of really one of the most storied performance spaces in all of New York. So I really encourage everybody, if you haven't already, get the book, read it, drink it in. It's both so comprehensive and yet at the same time so personal, because there's all these incredibly individual personal perspectives in it. I mean, it's such a gem. But let me start kind of at the beginning. Tell me what made you want to write this book, and how did this come about?
Well, I went to the bottom line starting. I moved back to New York City. I grew up in Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, and I came back to live in the city when I finished college at the University of Buffalo in Western New York. And I moved back to New York in the fall of 1973. The bottom line opened in February 1974. So very early on, after I moved back to New York, I was really now seriously pursuing a career as a music journalist. I began going to the club. My first show was Tanya Tucker. It was a press party that Epic Records was throwing, and because Tanya was well underage, okay, they weren't allowed to serve any liquor at the show, and that was the very first show that I went there. My next show was Susie Quatro and the New York Dolls a month later, and a very famous story that you'll have to read in the book about the Dolls breaking one of the mirrors in the dressing rooms, and this is a brand new club. They had spent so much money to make this club, and Arthur came, had gotten drunk, and tried to hit Jacob Johansson with a bottle, and missed, and it broke the mirror. And Allan at the point just said, "You'll never play here again." And of course, a few years later, David Johansen, because Allan was the way he was happy to book him again 5 years later, and David Johansen wound up playing the club from 1978 through when the club closed. So that was the kind of person that Allan was. But in any event, my last show at the club was, I think, a tribute to Dave Van Wong, just about a month or two before the club closed. So I had a long trek of going to hundreds and hundreds. When the club closed, I did a piece for Tracks, which was a magazine that was around for a short period of time. And it was really a capsule history of the club. I interviewed Allan, I interviewed a number of people who had played at the club. And I guess for some reason, for many years later, Allan kind of wanted to do a book. He'd made a couple of attempts, but they kind of didn't work out. And he still told me later in the back of his head, he always remembered this piece in Tracks. I kept coming back to this piece, Billy, and I don't know what it was. Maybe it's the writing, maybe it's just that one, but I thought, you know, and anyway, Allan reached out to me again in 2021, not long after the pandemic, and we decided to see if we could make a book. It all told me it took us about 2 years, but I was thrilled to get a chance to do a book like this, because I'm what they call a generalist. I mean, I'm a rock and roll guy at heart, I was doing all the punk stuff, but I like a lot of different music and a lot of different entertainment. And the bottom line was not about a scene. For all of you that ever went to the bottom line, it was like, you know, you go to Studio 54, you go to CBGB's, you go to, you know, whatever club it was, and it was a scene where people who always went to those clubs, the Village Vanguard, and all this stuff. But the bottom line was whoever was playing there that night, that was the scene, and it was so unique. So I go there as just someone that went to the club. When Allan suggested to me, look, I thought, wow, this is great to talk about so much music, to talk about the city, to talk about the neighborhood, and to talk about the business side, because Allan wanted to really talk about what it was like to own a club. And it just seemed to be just such great material that was out there, and if we could talk to people and people would want to talk to us, it would work. And I have to say that everybody that I got in touch with to try and interview the book, nobody, I think one person said no, because they just couldn't schedule it. Because everybody really respected both Allan and Stanley. Stanley was a hard negotiator, but he was a very fair person. And I think people really respected that. And Allan just had a wonderful, he loved music and still does. He's so passionate about music and artists and entertainment. And he just always wanted from the beginning to share that with all of you, to share that with all of us. And that was always his really driving force. I mean, the money that they made always was kind of, even though they ran a tight ship, I think it was really secondary to what they wanted to do especially for Allan, to just keep giving music for people to enjoy.
Right. One of the, there's so many interesting angles to this, but for me, as a kid who grew up in the outer boroughs, I was particularly moved by sort of the story of these two kids from Brooklyn who kind of had this, sort of passion from their sort of childhood and somehow turned it into a reality. Tell me a little more about kind of that part of the story and how you felt like it sort of shaped what this incredible place was for 30
They were
years.
great friends. I think they first met each other when they were in 4th grade, and then they started attending school together. And they were friends from the beginning. And Allan is kind of a slight person. He was like a small, thin person, and Stanley's a big guy. So the two of them made very interesting friendship even quickly, because Stanley was really kind of a big guy as a youngster. Then they split up. They were going to different schools because Stanley went to Stuyvesant and Allan was going to school in Brooklyn. When they got friendly again, they became friends, and at some point they both were going to school, and they were both at college, and then later into graduate school. And Allan got this idea and said that he wanted to help promote jazz, because he loved jazz growing up. He'd go to Birdland. And again, for all of those of you that went to the club, you know that the fact that there was no minimum at the club, okay? All the tickets cost the same amount of money. Isn't that amazing to think about? If you were first online, you'd be the first, you'd have the best seat in the house, and you could sit there with a glass of water for hours and hours. But,
I did that.
right once. And Allan had done that at Birdland, okay, growing up. He'd gone to Birdland, the great jazz club, and had seen all of these amazing performers sitting in what they call the gallery. You could sit at a table and get waitress service at Birdland and pay a decent amount of money, but you could also, for just a couple of bucks, sit in this little area called the gallery, off the side of the stage, and you wouldn't have to get a drink or anything. And Allan saw Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, I mean, you name it. He saw every great jazz artist in the 30s, 60s. But anyway, he wanted to try and do something to help promote jazz. And he got this idea that maybe he could start like some kind of non-profit. To do something, giving them the idea, well, you could start a non-profit and maybe have people subscribe and go to shows. And Allan had absolutely no money. He's still basically living at home with his folks. And Stanley was already starting to work at this point, doing legal work for people and other work. And so they went to see someone and told them that they could help them do this, but it would cost $250. This is 1964 or whatever. And so Allan said to Stanley after they met with this person, and Allan said to him, Stanley, look, this is great. We could get into show business. Wouldn't that be great? And Stanley's going, And he goes, and look, just for $250, we can start this. And I don't know anybody that has $250. You look at checking accounts. I mean, would you lend me? Would you put the money? I'm not going to ask him for a loan per se, but would you put the $250 in? And Stanley's like, I don't really want to be in the music business. He goes, but no, Stanley, you'll be great. We'll do great things. And they were such great friends that Stanley saw the passion and the belief in Allan, and he said, all right, let's give it a go. And then they started their little jazz interactions, and Stanley, of course, was the treasurer. And they started to promote shows, and that led to, as you can read in the book, them doing really tremendous, interesting things at a lot of different places around town. Starting, I think, at the Edison Hotel, where one night the guy thought they were going on for too long, and Roland Kirk was taking this amazing solo. And at 8 o'clock, the Edison wanted the room back, they wanted the bar back. The guy plugged the jukebox back in while Roland Kirk is still playing. And Allan, they were so offended, he said, we got to find some good places to do this. So they were at the 5 Spot here in the neighborhood. And eventually they started promoting different things. And ultimately they decided to just go out and promote for their own. And in their early days, they were just booking shows for other people. Now, for people like me who walked into the bottom line in the early 70s, I didn't know who these guys were or where they came from, to learn that they had promoted at the Village Gay Florida Lugoff. And they had promoted shows for Mike Porco at Folk City. And they had done shows every few nights a week at these places. And really, they started to understand the business, but they wanted to try and get their own place because you could never control things. There's a great story at Folk City where Julie Gold, from a distance, who played Folk City a lot, and she complained all the time because the piano was utterly out of tune. And she said to Mike Porco one night, Alan, she said, Mike, can you do something about the piano? He goes, Julie, we just painted it 2 days ago. But anyway, when they finally found their space, which was the Red Corridor, like I said, NYU was the landlord for the building, and the Red Corridor was on the ground floor at Fourth and Mercer. And Chuck DeLorme, who had owned the Red Corridor, had abandoned the club to the extent that there literally were the peanut shells on the floor and the sawdust, and it all smelled like beer from like 6 months ago. They found out that he was not going to, their lease was not going to get renewed. And they went and talked to NYU, and NYU gave them a 10-year lease for, I think, a little over $1,200 a month, which still was money. And that's how the whole thing kind of got rolling.
Incredible. You mentioned the Village Gate, and this space was unique, but obviously there's other places that it makes you kind of think about, and that there's some similarities. The Village Gate is one of them.
Yeah.
The other one, because you mentioned the New York Dolls, that I thought about in relation to the sort of origin story here is Mercer Arts. Which of course had collapsed and closed just before this opened. And so I'm kind of just curious what you found in terms of kind of how it fit into the sort of ecosystem of performance spaces at the time, if there was like a hole left by the loss of Mercer Arts that it kind of helped fill and things like
I
that.
think to some extent, except, as I said before, they had such a vision of wanting to make a world-class listening room, and they approached it that way. The other thing about most other club owners, and I think Mike Club, who was a really, really interesting and amazing guy, but the key was he had bought a bar, okay, and then when the folk music started, when he was still on right across the street, at Caddy Corner, on the other side of 4th Street, and he was a club owner who started to promote music. And I can think back all the way to go to Chicago, and Phil and Leonard Chess had a club, and they were bar owners, and they started presenting music. The next thing you know, it's Mighty Works and Howlin' Wolf Blood. But a lot of club owners who present a lot of music, they have a bar or a club first.
Right.
And I think the difference in terms of the ecosystem is that Allan and Stanley decided we want to build a music listening room, and so that people will come here to listen to music. So the ecosystem, I think, had a space for a place that would really be a listening room, not really a hang. I'm not sure they thought of it that way necessarily, but very quickly, of course, it became that.
But an interesting thing about that is you think that that could possibly make it feel sort of more formal, more uptown, but it didn't. It was sort of this quality performance space, but it felt totally downtown.
I think part of that is the people that work there. People literally walked off the street and said, is there a job? Can I do something? Devin, we have one chapter in the book in which it's called, I got my job through the ... Village Voice. If you guys remember, I got my job through the New York Times. And I decided, I talked to a lot of different people, and I settled in on Devin Zicker, who was the first dishwasher at the club, and then moved down into the club. I talked to Matilda Parente, who was one of the waitresses, who wound up going to medical school and becoming a doctor. Donna Dyken, who people have remember, she was always the woman at the door and handled all the press lists, and she worked from waitress to this to that. To Jessica White, who was the last assistant to Allan. And these were all people that just showed up at a very young age with most of them very little experience in doing anything except wanting to be around the music scene. And also, to your point, Andrew, whenever you went to the club, Allan and Stanley were there tearing the tickets in half. So in terms of the formality of the place, the two guys that ran that club welcomed you in every single night. Stanley left and moved to Las Vegas, in the late 90s, but they welcomed you at the door. So I think part of that was the vibe that they were able to create, and also the fact, again, as I said before, that there was no menu. Right. So the informality was just come in and hang out. You want to see music? Here's music. You want to see comedy? Here's Uncle Floyd. You guys remember Uncle Floyd? If you want to see a theatrical performer, Betty Buckley. Betty Buckley performed at the Bottom Line countless shows Once she became a Broadway, when she was between shows on Broadway, she would just do, or theater, she did not want to hear the word Cabaret. I'm not a Cabaret. So I think that, and so from comedy to folk to rock to jazz to country, the In Their Own Words series featured, if any of you went to any of those shows in which they had 4 songwriters just sitting around talking. Vince Stelza, the great DJ from WNEW and then from WFD, hosted so many of those shows and I think that also helped keep things not formal, in a great sense.
It always felt like a very sort of a down-to-earth, kind of like almost more like a cultural center in a way, because it really was sort of a place for sort of ideas and different approaches to be kind of exchanged for people to hone their craft. I want to switch gears for a second, a little bit, just going back to your process in terms of the book. It's amazing to hear that there was only one person who you couldn't reach. Although given how many people you did reach, I guess in another sense that does make perfect sense. But tell me a little bit about what that process was like. How did you decide? How did you track people down? What were those conversations like?
Well, obviously, the fact that well over 3,000 different acts played at the club, so clearly, played at the club. So when Allan and I started to talk about it, we started to try and figure out a pathway for us to do this. And in terms of just talking to, especially to artists, we started to set aside types of music and types of entertainment that we could find some representative people to talk to. So once that got done, we got a list and we started making lists and sent them back to him. And Allan, and he calls himself a proud Luddite. Okay, he and his wife Allan, they both live at the Actors Home in Englewood, and he doesn't have his own computer. He goes up to the business center, checks his email a couple of times a day. He doesn't text. So all it is phone calls.
I'm guessing you have a few proud Luddites here tonight. I'm just gonna guess.
So generally it's phone calls or email, and so we just would correspond, and obviously talk to them a lot on the phone. And as we started to figure out who we wanted to talk to, and Allan had a lot of people that he wanted me to talk to, specifically for specific things, which was great. That he knew someone would have a good story, or he hoped someone would have a good story. And then past that, we started to think about, or at least I started as a lifelong music critic and journalist, having gone to the club throughout its history, well, what shows meant a lot, not to me. What shows meant a lot to the artists? What shows meant a lot to their careers? What shows do you know, or you heard stories that something interesting or weird or wonderful or not so wonderful happened at the club? And so that's when we started to really try to dive into who are we going to talk to and why. So the ones that were obvious were, like I said before, like Bruce Springsteen, because his shows there in 1975, as Allan would say afterwards, they set the bar for what could happen at the bottom line. But he came into that club with people not being sure, is it all hype? Is Springsteen just hype? Because there was a lot of stuff going on about that. And those 5 nights where he did, if you know Springsteen, he did 2 shows a night for 5 nights. And each of them was well over 2 hours. These are big, as he said to me, thank God I was only 25 years old. So I could do that. So looking for people who had very important shows. Dolly Parton, who unfortunately was not able to get to speak, because she was a person that it just didn't happen. One major person. But Dolly had just recently gone solo. If you know her career, she was partnering with Porter Wagner, the great country singer. He's the one who kind of discovered her. And when she was starting to then assemble her solo career and was trying to make the transition from just being a country singer and a little bit of pop into more of a kind of a pop, just singer. And her shows at the bottom line coincided with her first big kind of hit solo album. And she did send words to me about some things, but we didn't get to talk to her. But that was another artist who we had a lot in on that show, because that meant a great deal to her career. After she did her shows each night, the 3 nights that they were there, RCA Records threw a party for her at Windows on the World. It's out of the World Trade Center. And then invited, after the late show, everybody at the club who worked there to go to the show. I mean, just phenomenal. But that's Dolly. Yeah. So they were made, and then we have a bunch that, like I said, we were looking to find people that would have great stories, important things that happened in their careers, or, great things. I mean, Roseanne Cash, met her future husband, John Leventhal. She said, I was there, my first marriage had broken up, and I was sitting there and I was waiting for Leo Kottke to perform, and I had one of the little cocktail napkins, and it started scribbling down some lyrics, and it wound up being the lyrics to her song Seventh Avenue. And then she said, and I remember I was backstage and I saw this a whole drink of water. Who is this guy? And it turned out that it was her future husband, John. And we have a lot of those kind of stories. I mean, Steve Van Zandt. Steve Van Zandt met his wife Maureen from the Buckhorn to him. So we have a lot of these crazy things like that. So those kind of things obviously I want to hear from people. And people that just had great, nice stories about what happened. The people that worked at the club were tremendous stories. Because they just saw stuff that went on, and they were only happy to tell you everything that they saw.
I'm curious in terms of the people that you did interview who surprised you the most. What were you not expecting that came out of the interview?
Carolyn or whatever. Oh, that's interesting a whole lot of people that I thought I was going to get good stuff and even better stuff from Lenny White, a great jazz drummer who grew up in Queens and talked about his path to playing music. And he goes back with Allan to Jazz Interactions when he was a teenager. And Allan saw that he was a really good drummer. And then the next thing you know, he's playing on Miles Bitches. His bitches grew. And he had wonderful things to talk about being a young African American growing up in New York. He had wonderful stuff. As I mentioned before, Meg Griffin was a font of great stories and great information. All the people that worked on Leader of the Pack, which I can talk for a minute about that. Yeah. One of the great other stories about the bottom line, and I guess a lot of people don't know, is that well before the era of the jukebox musical, in 1984, Allan had an idea to do kind of a 3-day tribute show to the great songwriter Ellie Greenwich, who wrote a ton of hits throughout the early 1960s, from Chapel of Love to Hanky Panky to Leader of the Pack, and also a lot of the girl group songs. She wrote a lot of them. And Allan thought it'd be great to do maybe a tribute show. And they assembled a bunch of people to do that show, and that show wound up being made into a whole theatrical musical with a script by Melanie Mintz, and Ellie came on board to help out on it, and they hired a whole bunch of people to take part, and they had a whole bunch of singers and performers led by the astonishing Darlene Love, and of course every Christmas they think of the Darlene Love singing Christmas Won't You Please. And Darlene was a tremendous interview. She was wonderful, and she came from Los Angeles to take part in it. And her very first night at the club, well, at first they got her to come to the club that year before to perform. She tells a wonderful story that she's booked into the club. Steve Van Zandt got her to move to New York. Him and Bruce had seen her perform at the Roxy in LA. And she was doing Hungry Heart in her set. And they went backstage, and Steve got her phone, and he calls her up like a week later. He goes, Darlene, nobody stays in Los Angeles. If you want to do anything, music, come to New York, we'll get you some shows. And they got her booked into the club, and Darlene tells a great story in the book of, she gets there, and she's backstage. She hasn't met Allan yet, and she looks at the little menu, and she decides to order a cheesecake and a cup of coffee. Now, Darlene does not realize that when they opened the club, one of the house ground rules was no free drinks and no free food. If you're a performer, you get paid, and you get a substantial discount on food and on drinks, but you don't get them for free. So Darlene orders cheesecake and coffee, and the next thing you know, the guy backstage is saying, well, should I run a tab? Because that's what it was. So Allan walks in and she says, I like cheesecake and coffee. And I looked up and Allan walks in, he said, I just want to introduce myself to you, Miss Love. My name's Allan Pepper. I'm not, she goes, you're the owner of the club? You're charging me for cheesecake? And Allan said, well, that's what we do. Well, the next thing you know, they've gotten really friendly. And when Darlene decided that she would take place in them trying to develop lead her back into full-scale show, and she would have to now come from LA and actually spend time in New York. Allan took his wife Eileen, and Dorleen stayed at their house in New Jersey. And she came without a ton of clothing. She wore Eileen's clothing. It's just the kind of thing that went on. But, that show featured a wonderful singer named Lula Hedwig, who was one of Bette Midler's originally Harlettes, and her backup crew. She played the young Ellie, and then got Bobby J, the great New York disc jockey, who used to do the doo-wop shows, to be kind of the narrator of the show, and to play the character of Phil Spector, Paul Schaefer. And
genius casting.
And it was unbelievable. And this show drew such an astonishing reaction that eventually some producers came in and decided to take the show to Broadway. That did not turn out so well, mostly because almost everybody involved in the show, with the exception of Darling Love, did not wind up in the Broadway show. And that's a real showbiz story. That would take me an hour and a half to tell her, but if you're going to buy the book, I recommend it. That's a chapter you really pay some attention to, is to see how the difference between staging a show at a nice club in Greenwich Village downtown, and then, no, it has to go to Broadway. And there was one guy from one of the producers who said, oh, there's nothing wrong with this show that 6 good jokes can't fix, and et cetera, et cetera.
But it's one of the interesting things about the bottom line is just that it wasn't just a series of performances, but these really interesting sort of themes or explorations, like what you just described.
And a large part of that is also about the club scene in New York, because talking about the echo system. Once we got into the early 1980s, and places like the Ritz showed up, and there were places that you could hang out. One famous story that I can tell you that the Clash were offered to Allan and Stanley to do their first big New York show at the Bottom Line. The only stipulation, they didn't want seats. They wanted the audience to be able to hang out and stand and hang around. And from day one, Allan and Stanley said, no, the seats stay. And so once British bands started playing the Ritz, and not necessarily the Bottom Line, Allan started to scramble a little bit, and then started to think of shows that he could create and produce. And that changed the nature of the club, but as was Legal Independent, it was a great success. But then there were great shows. There was a whole series of doo-wop shows that Bobby J hosted. Every doo-wop group from the 50s and 60s performed there. Prisoners of Rock and Roll, which were a whole bunch of generally unsigned New York bands, like the Smithereens and the DBs and the Bongos, Richard Baron's band, and all of them got to showcase there. And the club, throughout its history, I think still remained one of the, certainly for this first 10 years, kind of the premier showcase clubs. If you had an album coming out, you played the Bottom Line. Nobody would play another club first. You could play some other clubs after a while, but when you had your album coming out, the record company would be behind it. And so that attention to detail that the club had, that people wanted to come in and debut, their material there. And of course, as I mentioned before, the In Their Own Words series, which I'll mention one favorite show, but kind of In Their Own series, which is going with songwriters. And Allan had kind of gotten the idea a little bit, if you know the Bluebird Cafe in Nashville, which has songwriters doing what they call guitar polls. Everybody does a song, and the next guy does a song, and it's all great songwriters, and all the great songwriters in Nashville go there. And it's a small club, it is a listening club. Allan wanted to do something like that, but he didn't really want to be limited by just doing country below it. He did it now, it's much wider net in Nashville. So they would do shows, and one of the shows that I really was one of my favorites, 3 of the songwriters, it was Tom T. Hall, who wrote Harper Valley PTA and I Love Little Girl. Yeah. And a great country songwriter known as the Storyteller. Tony Wine, who wrote the great 60s British invasion hit Groovy Kind of Love, and had a very long career as a songwriter, and who interestingly had been the voice of both Betty and Veronica in the Archies. And as she said during the show, we were all getting paid union scale, because there were no Archies, they were 2-dimensional. And she said at the session, I kept saying, excuse me, I should get double pay. I'm doing 2 different voices. And she said she didn't pay them. And then the third person was Barrett Strong, who recorded Motown's very first hit, Money. And then as a songwriter, wrote almost every great Temptations hit from the late 60s. including Just My Imagination. And he told the story of just looking at his window one day and seeing a pretty woman walk down the street. And he just thought to himself, oh, gee. And then he realized, well, he thought he was having a relationship with this woman. He said, well, and to himself, he said, well, yeah, that's just my imagination running away with me. And then he said, wait a minute, what a great idea for a song. So we had a lot of those. And I think Allan's ability to create and promote these shows really helped a lot.
Yeah, well, and it's amazing how much of that you were able to capture in the book. Let me ask you about Allan and, working with him, particularly in relation to the book. On the one hand, obviously, there's no better source in terms of, connecting people, knowing the stories where the bodies are buried, sort of, so to speak. You could also imagine it could be incredibly challenging to work with a person, this is his baby, having a, you gotta do it this way, or, it's gotta be very, what was that process like?
There were challenging moments of working on it, but I had some ideas of how to. Allan from the beginning wanted it to be an oral history, as I mentioned. He wanted to hear these voices. And so I wasn't sure at the beginning of whether that can work or not. It can result in a lot of extra work, although you think, you're opening the book and everybody's talking, but trust me, people don't speak. And their sentences go in different directions, their stories will go in different, and being able to take what you get from the interviews. And one of the gratifying things since we finished the book is that were some people who started to get the book, and even though I had very one conversations with them, and I had to take pieces from the conversation, everybody thought everything was fine. But in terms of working together, Allan had a lot of things he wanted to try and get into the book, because it also is his autobiography. It's a memoir, and it's a great story of his friendship with Allan, his lifelong romance with Allan. There are great stories attached to all of that. So when we're trying to figure out how to do the book, Allan had some ideas of how we should try and go about it. But as a kind of a historian, I thought it has to be chronological. Because I see a lot of books where a chapter on this artist, and then you play here, and you start to get lost. And I thought if we just proceed chronologically, and also since it is a story of music in New York City throughout that time period, and the music scene changed, and the club had to change, and I thought being able to get all of that in would be the best way to approach it. And Allan agreed with me, but he must have had 300 people he wanted me to interview, and I said, well,
how many did you interview?
Well, it was well over 100. So, and it was, just getting everybody against a line, the ducks in a row, because there's a lot of gatekeepers, and being able to talk to the people. It took a long time to talk to Bruce, but that was all. That worked out fine. I'll share my one personal story here. Joyce is here, and she can back me up on this. So we were working for months and months and months to talk to Bruce, and various things were happening. He's going to Europe, he's coming back, his mother took ill, so all of these things were happening with him. So finally, I'm looking at his schedule, and he's on a long tour of Europe, and I'm seeing where it is, and he's on tour, and it's May, June, Italy, series there, and then it's still like end of July, Wembley Stadium, a couple of days, and then the next gig is August 17th or 18th in Pittsburgh. So I said, well, obviously, he's finishing the tour, and he's going to be off. So
it's an opening.
We've been working with his people. His people were really good, but just trying to be able to, for him to be able to, have some time to do this. So we finally nailed it down to a couple of days. It's all right. It's going to be either Friday or Monday. Fine. Around noon. Okay, fine. So Friday at noon. He can't do it today, but we're going to do it Monday. And I knew they had a show in Pittsburgh on Wednesday, so this is going to be it. So I'm ready to go. I'm downstairs in my home office. And I've got my digital tape recorder ready, I've got my cell phone ready for when we start the conversation, and I've got a cup of coffee ready, and I'm ready. And so it's noon, and I'm waiting, 12:15, no. 12:30, no. 12:45, no. So at that point I'm going, So I text his assistant, Allie, and I wrote, Allie, I'm here for Bruce, and she immediately goes, Bruce didn't call you? Oh my God, no. He knew, let me see what happened. So 5 minutes ago, she said he had something to do just around this time. You gonna be home later? Say no. So I said, yes, I'll be home later. So 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. So finally around 3:30, I want to go to the bathroom. I want to get a cup of coffee from upstairs. So I go upstairs, I go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee. And as soon as I sit down upstairs with the cup of coffee, my cell phone Freehold, New Jersey. And so I answer the phone, is this Billy? I go, yeah. He goes, hey, it's Bruce. Listen, man, I'm so sorry. I had some stuff to do earlier. As much time as you need, okay? I said, oh, Bruce, no, absolutely fine. Let me go downstairs and get myself set up, okay? And I go downstairs. I talked to him for half an hour. He's wonderful. And at the end, he says, look, if you need anything else, just let me know. And again, I'm just so sorry. I usually don't do this, but I'm so. I said, no, everything's fine. I walk back upstairs, and God bless her, she says to me, did I hear Bruce Springsteen apologize to you? And that's kind of one of my favorite stories I've just told me.
Wow, that's amazing. And sort of almost exactly the kind of demeanor.
And it's Bruce. It's exactly what you would expect. So it was really nice.
That's right. Well, it's interesting, because I was going to ask about this, that the sort of oral history format was Allan, and the chronological format was you. One of a million things that I'd like to explore, but conscious of the time, I want to now sort of jump to the end and ask you to talk a little bit about the end of the bottom line, the NYU dispute, and sort of how that came about. I think a lot of people here are interested in that as well.
I think that the trajectory of the club finally kind of going under probably goes back to 9/11, okay? Because 9/11 had such an impact on all of the businesses downtown. The club was closed for a while. You couldn't do anything anyway. And anytime there was a red alert, there was no downtown, right, during those days. So they lost a lot of business. And then even after people started going to shows again, a lot of people did not want to go downtown. They wanted to just maybe take a picture and then get up to Midtown and go to the theater. And I think, as I was doing my research and talking to Allan about it, things like, if any of you people remember B.B. King's on 42nd Street, B.B. King's was more of a corporate place. It was kind of a bottom line on, super steroids. Yeah, I mean, it was set up almost the same way, but there was a lot of money behind it, and they could offer somebody to play at the B.B. King's in this city and the B.B. King's in that city. And so the competition for being able to play, became an issue. Not that the club didn't have amazing people playing all the way through. I mean, I have a list from the last year, which is can't believe amazing people that still go. But they were starting to have some problems there, and they started to fall behind a little bit on their bills, and especially on their rent, and NYU was their landlord. And for most of the club's history, the president of NYU, his last name, Jay Oliva, who was a supporter of the club, and himself played music. He appeared once or twice at NYU functions at the bottom line, doing some Irish folk songs and stuff like that. But anyway, they were very good to the club in terms of their leases for the first number of years. But after he left, and someone else took over as president of the school, who I think was the head of the legal department, all of a sudden, the fact that the bottom line was a little bit behind, and they would always give them some money, but they were behind. And at some point, they fell a good amount behind in the rent. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $175,000. And they were negotiating with NYU, but Allan said it became clear pretty early on that they did not want to renew the lease, and even if it was going to be month to month, and you just wouldn't know what was going to happen. And so they started trying to negotiate, and then they started to give them eviction notices. And then it was a protracted battle with NYU, but Allan just kept saying no matter what we did, and at some point they raised more than enough money to pay the back rent. I think Allan said eventually enough people came forward to try and help them out, and this was people ranging from the people at Sirius XM Radio, who had started to do so, to a lot of just friends of the club who had some money. They raised almost $750,000. But first, NYU just wanted the back rent before they would do anything. And that's that kind of blackmail. Well, we'll think about giving you a new release, but first give us, and Allan was like, they're trying to help put a little bit of pressure on you. Well, we'll give you that money as soon as we know what we're going to get. And then they kind of made an agreement, and then at the last minute, they were going to raise the rent from about $10,000 to somewhere over $25,000 a month. And for a club running on small margins, that was not bad. And then they had to make renovations in the building. And Stanley, who by this time was living in Las Vegas, but still was helping run the club really on a day-to-day basis, said to Allan, well, if we do everything they want us to do,
it's gonna cost us close to $1 million. That takes care of all the money we had, and now we're back at square one. We have to do these renovations and close the club and do the renovations, and now they get the renovations done, and we're starting at zero now, and we're gonna be back at the same. So at that point, it wasn't gonna happen.
I'll venture a guess that NYU didn't really want to keep them there, and
They
was
just wanted
looking for-
them out, and that was it. And to think that they didn't want to use the space
Yeah.
for events, I mean, they had this first-class hall, a small intimate, but they just wanted them out. As for most of the neighborhood.
Well, it was the time when, NYU was just expanding
Yes.
and it sort of gotten out that way.
And one of the great ironies, that I put a little button on this, is that when the bottom line first opened, what the neighborhood was like in this part of the village in Washington Square Park, and, a lot of drug dealing going on in Washington Square Park, and then, the bottom line was situated between there and Broadway, and if you went to Broadway, which is all industrial, in 1974, that would mainly be what we now call these days sex workers, all along there. So between the drug dealers on Washington Square Park and the sex workers, this was not the optimum place for a club, but they built it and people came. But very quickly after the club became popular, NYU started using the bottom line in their bulletins and promotional literature for people that wanted to come to, we have a first class music, and then at the very end, they were kicking them out. So
The university and the city.
got it, yeah, so great irony.
One of several. Well, I want to give our audience a chance to ask you some questions as well. So, yes, Ben.
How did you guys come up with the name Possibly Fourth and Mercer?
I'm good at titles. I worked for many years at Cream Magazine, which was probably the most irreverent rock music magazine ever. And we were always good at thinking great. I mean, I'm good at it. When I worked for the Village Voice, I was there one day handing in copies of Bob Christgau, and they were doing this story on the, remember when cloning started? Remember the sheep? There were the two sheep?
Dolly.
So there was a picture of them, and they wanted a headline, and they could not think of a headline. And I looked at it and I said, and I think we have people old enough to get this, I went, which twin has the Tony? Is it permanence? And so I've always been good with headlines, and obviously, since the club was located at Fourth and Mercer, and he had Bob Dylan's very famous song, Positively 4th Street, I thought to myself, well, Positively 4th and Mercer, that's going to work, because Dylan had one of his breakthrough performances at Folk City, at Hunter across the street, and Bruce had his show on that side, this side of the street. I thought, well, this works, so that's how I came up with this idea.
Yes.
So, my friend Pat, my name is Ann. I'm a New York City tour guide, and I do tours that begin and end at the bottom line. And I always tell my guests, this is one of the most important corners in American music history, but there's nothing here to tell you that, because NYU owns the building, and they're not going to put a plaque on the side of the building, which Greenwich Village Society always does, put plaques on the building to tell the story. If this were England, there would be a blue plaque on that building saying this is where Bruce Springsteen's career started, and across the street there would be the same thing for Bob Dylan. So is there any, there's this New York State thing sometimes you see on the street. Is there any way we can put some kind of acknowledgement? Because to me it's just like it's this major hole in New York City's identity. The fact that this is where this music started and there's no acknowledgement.
Historic markers in the village, sure.
Which we do. It's an NYU building, so you can't put anything on it unless NYU says it's okay. We've never approached them about it. It's an interesting idea. There's a possibility that you could get a secondary street renaming, so that's the city of New York. So that could sort of be another way of doing it. I certainly agree with you that it's a history worth in some public way acknowledging, and we'll definitely think about it if there's ways in which we can promote.
And in the meantime, we've got the title of the book. So there you go. So the corner is memorial.
The gentleman in the back?
What's the state of the archive? Did they think about getting every artist to sign a release to record everything? And why did the label fail?
Well, they've been putting stuff out. Omnivore's been putting stuff out now. Allan has had some over the years, some deals with Razor and Tie and a couple of other labels. And if I'm not mistaken, Omnivore Recordings has been doing them recently. But I know he's been in discussions for the archives to be house somewhere. I don't know kind of that part of it, but I know that Allan has been working fairly diligently for a good home for the archives. And I think at some point they'll probably reach it.
Did Stanley have the vision from the very beginning to record for the artists to get permission?
I think just about everything was recorded, yeah. I mean, I know on Wolfgang's Vault, which is that website and the Bill Raymond, there are a lot of bottom line shows that I think they licensed to Wolfgang's Vault. So if you go there, for instance, you can hear the Dolly Parton show from 1977. And I know there's a lot of stuff there but they're looking for home theater.
Ma'am?
Yeah, are those just audio or are there any video? Like, is there any film?
There's not too much. I mean, there are some things on YouTube. I mean, I didn't get to mention before, but Meatloaf's Bad at Health had incredibly important shows at the bottom line. And one of those shows is on YouTube to see. And I know at least one of the Flo and Eddie New Year's Eve shows, my God, are on YouTube. So there, if you type in bottom line on YouTube, and you get to see a lot of stuff. But mostly it's just the audio that there was recording. It's really pre-video-ish a lot of this.
All the way in the back.
All right. There's a famous Lou Reed record recorded live at the bottom line called Take No Prisoners, which he lashes out at all the critics in the audience. Were you there, and were you one of the critics?
Thank goodness I was
Wow.
not. I was not one of the people that he lashed out against, thank God. So, but no, that was Mark here. We were able to talk to Marty Fogel, who was a saxophone player throughout that period of time, who tells wonderful stories about being back with Lou Reed while he's demolishing his audience. We have a bunch of great stories about things that tended to happen when Lou Reed played the club that didn't happen when anybody else played the club in the audience, but to a great extent. But no, thank goodness Bob Briscoe got it there, and I was spared. Now I go home with Lou okay for most of my career.
Sir?
Yeah, is there a list of all the shows that was ever done?
I don't think, Allan has a gigography. I don't think it's ever, this book would have been like 1,000 pages long if we put in a gigography, but I think I've been encouraging him. He's getting a little bit involved with one of his kids, getting where he was adult, his daughter Jessie, we're doing some stuff on social media. So at that point there may be, but you're talking, like I said, it was when he sent me the gigography on my computer, it almost broke my storage. because the club was open most nights. I mean, there were very few times the club was really dark, and you're talking 30 years of people playing. It was a great question, and it's amazing to look through just who played from night to night to night. I mean, that's like I say to people. Dolly Parton came in after 3 nights with Lou Reed, so that was insanity. I went there one night and there's Lou, like wanting to murder his audience, and 3 nights later there's Dolly Parton. She became everybody's darling in 5 minutes, and in fact that would happen in the same space, 3 days apart.
Incredible. Sir?
Is there any kind of story naming the club?
Yes. Oh, that is a good one. I guess I should read that one. I guess I can just. This one's an easy one. They had gotten this space, so everything they knew, and they were building the club, they knew it was going to happen. We were feeling good, and Stanley and I knew we had to come up with a name. Stanley and I had an agreement that whatever we called the club, both of us had to like it. I started thinking with the tip of the hat to all the great music places from the 1940s about the Roxy or the Paramount. Stanley called me and I told him, and he didn't think that much of it. And I said, I don't know, what about Allan Stan's place? I told him. I didn't think that much of that one either. Soon after we'd acquired the space, Stanley took his family off to a vacation to Puerto Rico. And one night I went out to dinner at Elio's in the Village with Michael Rosa, who had played drums with the Quinn Ames group when we booked them at the Gate in Folk City. He was now working as an A&R guy at Elektra Records, and he'd just come back from a company retreat in Las Vegas. I asked him if he had a good time, and Michael said, yeah, we were having a great time until the Bottom Line boys got here. somehow when I heard that phrase, it just resonated with me. I called Stanley in Puerto Rico. I said, I think I have the name and I really like this one. I said, Stanley, what's the one expression that people in our business use more than any other one? And without missing a beat, he said, the bottom line. I said, Stanley, that's the name. I held my breath, and Stanley started repeating it like he was tasting a fine wine. The bottom line. The bottom line. Bottom line. I think I like it. And that was it. The name really appealed to both of us. It appealed to Stanley because of the business connotation, and it appealed to me because it was much of the essence of what I wanted to do. Present the best music available in any genre at any time. It was who we were, and our club was going to be called the Bottom Line.
Seems like it suited it very well. More questions? Yes, ma'am?
I think I was at the very first show of the Bottom Line, and that was Dr. John. Do you know who was the last person to play?
The last person was actually it was kind of a tribute to Woody Guthrie, which kind of made a lot of sense. Hosted, I think Carla Guthrie's daughter was involved in it, and it was just kind of it was scripted somewhat. It was just talking about Woody Guthrie's America, and that was literally about 2 weeks before what would have been the 30th anniversary. And David Bromberg did the anniversary shows every year, and he was all set to play, and they padlocked the door, and that was it.
I'm going to ask a question which I was thinking about asking earlier. This extends a little bit beyond the book, but I'm curious your thoughts on, with the closure of the Bottom Line, kind of what it meant in terms of New York and performance spaces and things like that. It was around the same time CBGB also closed, and so many places have been lost. I think you could objectively say New York is not the same town in terms of performance spaces that it was 25 years ago. What are your thoughts about where that closure fit into that historical arc?
Also, in terms of you say about the informality, and certainly those clubs could have been more different than CBGB's and Obama, but they shared that sense of informality. When you went to CBGB's, and that's silly. He wants his money, when you came in. But I think that the club closing, it did take a piece of the village away, and that really has not been replaced. And you were kind of hoping that another good, well-constructed club that would go. But I think the economics changed, and I think you saw it in when the club was not able to keep going. And once we turned into the 2000s, and the economy just is going in a different direction in terms of live music. And like I said, you go to a show, and if you sit here, it's $50, and if you sit there, it's $40, and if you sit over, and that kind of mindset is completely antithetical to what they wanted to do, at clubs like CBGB's. So I think it's just the nature of the economics, certainly of the live music business. And look, I understand that musicians can't sell their music anymore. They can't. No one's buying no one's buying CDs or albums. You're streaming and Spotify and all this place. So most people make their money playing live and having merch. So people have to play music. So you understand the economics of it going where it went, but it's a different time.
It's funny, when I was younger, I could afford to see more concerts than I can now as a professional with a healthy income. I can't shell out $250 every time I want to go, see somebody in concert. But anyway, that's a whole other story. Other questions?
No, just one more question.
Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, great. Well, please everybody join me in thanking our